Hello, I'm Dane Frew, and welcome to our sixth episode of Divorce Unplugged. Geoff, thanks for joining us again. How are you?
I'm really well, and it's lovely to be back. It's an opportunity again to hopefully share some information with our listeners and viewers. And we've gone through a lot of things in the last couple of
We
chats.
have did a bit of myth busting last time, which was fun.
We had a lot of fun busting those myths.
And I'm interested in today's topic. We're talking about why divorce is like fixing a car. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. So, would you agree on that?
I would agree entirely. So we have the full spectrum of getting divorced. Sometimes it is relatively simple, and sometimes we have to work quite hard.
We do. All right. So let's have a bit of a look at why filing for divorce can sometimes be a bit tricky. So first, to get divorced, do you have to prove that you're married?
Yes. Oddly enough, and we get some feedback from people who, for example, don't have their marriage certificate. Why do I need to spend money to get my marriage certificate when I'm getting divorced? And, well, I say to them, well, that's the rules. And the rules are that you have to show that you're married to actually get
Rules are
divorced.
rules.
Yes, I didn't prescribe the legislation, but
No.
that's the case.
Yeah. So a divorce application needs to be given to the other spouse if it's not a joint application. Is that correct?
Yes. Very important part of the process is endeavouring or bringing the attention of the divorce application to the other spouse.
So have you dealt with any complex issues around delivering that? And
Oh,
can you give us some examples? I'm sure you've got plenty of stories over your 30 years of dealing with these matters.
well, definitely. So we have all sorts of problems in service of the divorce application, from lengthy separations where we don't know where the other spouse is. They might have moved interstate, they might be overseas. Quite commonly, parties do relocate overseas after a separation. They go back to their home country and then trying to actually bring the divorce to their attention. So we go back to the clanky Family Law Act that talks about service by post or in person. Quite difficult, but then we have a number of workarounds that the court allows us to undertake after we exhaust those early efforts.
So if you're trying to serve overseas, what options do you have and what options exist?
Well, we just actually physically served a divorce application in the Philippines only in the last couple of days. And sometimes that's just too expensive. So we would get a quote, for example, for a process server if we know their address, to hand them people some documents. And I think we had one in Egypt only in the last week where the cost to physically hand someone it was in the thousands of dollars. So the court doesn't usually put the poor applicant to the expense of spending thousands of dollars on personal service. Then we have the tricky bit where if post isn't going to work, because some places simply don't receive mail, what do we do next? And usually the court will try and allow us to use some form of electronic communication. And what is that? Well, that could be anything from email to social media. Sometimes we actually serve the documents via Meta or Facebook. Sometimes we send the documents via WhatsApp. Sometimes we even text it, which is quite a arduous task when you're trying to text half a dozen documents to somebody.
If I could get a WhatsApp message saying that I've been divorced.
Yes. Well, before that, you even get one to say, well, you are getting divorced.
Well, I'm getting divorced.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely correct.
All right. Interesting. I guess you got to do what you got to do. And the beauty of technology and social media these days is that you can utilize those those things to your benefit.
Now, those platforms are available, and we're a bit like the postie. We will always find a way to get the mail through.
So on a different topic, what happens if the separated spouse has lost capacity?
We would genuinely have had 3 of these in the last 12 months. So the situation is that there are provisions under the legislation to serve, usually if they've got an appointed litigation guardian, which is not normally the case, because why would someone have a litigation guardian? But then if there is a formal attorney under a state legislation, so they've given a power of attorney to a child or a relative or a friend, we can serve it to that person. And strangely enough, the third option is if they don't have a power of attorney, but they might be in care, for example, a nursing facility, that we can actually send it to the nursing facility. But that really does tend to confuse the poor old nursing home, I have to say, because they think, well, what do I do with the document?
Yeah. So what if both parties are residing overseas, can they get divorced in Australia?
Yes. So we touched on this in an earlier episode, but the reality is, look, if we have one of at least one of the parties is an Australian citizen,
Yep.
then you can apply even if you're based overseas for work or recreational purposes.
So what about if part one spouse is getting divorced and wants to keep their address confidential? Is that possible to do, or in serving the other documents, do you have to disclose that information?
No, the legislation's been fairly kind in that sense because we have and commonly deal with high conflict situations. People separate for reasons, and conflict is one of them. So confidentiality in addresses is important. So we become the middle person, so to speak, where our address becomes the address for service of any documents, and that we don't need to necessarily disclose the wife's address, or in fact, if there's a real genuine concern for the safety of even the children who might be living with the wife, the school which they attend.
Okay, yeah. So there's full confidentiality. So the ex-spouse can even not be given the school as to where their kids go to school. I guess
That's correct, which
Yeah.
sounds a little bit sad, but that is the case. Oddly enough, it actually works in reverse a little bit. Sometimes the responding spouse doesn't want their address disclosed, and they may disclose it to us in confidence for us to send them the documents or give us some address which we will then actually not disclose to the applicant. So because of an order of the court or something else along those lines. I did one yesterday.
Yeah,
exactly
right.
like that.
Yeah, interesting. So we've spoke about this in an earlier episode as well. So our listeners may be aware that it's becoming more aware now that people that do get separated are actually living together because of financial circumstances and other reasons. So is that more complex to apply for a divorce in those situations?
Yes, it is, and that's why, as I said, when we're trying to fix a car, sometimes it's filling the radiator, and sometimes it's a full transmission repair. So living under the same roof has some guidelines to give sufficient evidence to the court to show that yes, you were living separately and apart, albeit under the one roof. And there's a suite of essentially questions that the court wants answered by way of an affidavit, and you've got to do two of them. So if you're the applicant wife, for example, she would have to swear an affidavit as to how they were living separately and apart. For example, did they live in separate bedrooms? Did they eat meals together? How did they manage the finances? Have they separated the finances? The intimate personal relationship at an end? Did they inform government bodies like Centrelink that they've separated? Those are the sort of things that would go to show that someone's separated. But you also need a second person to verify that. So when we have a joint application, which is about 20% of divorce applications, the husband and wife would normally both swear an affidavit on very similar terms saying how they live separately. But if you're a sole applicant, you've actually got to have somebody, be that another family member, an adult child, a friend down the road who actually was aware of the separation. And that can be quite difficult. People are very private about that.
They could be. So I guess living under the same roof, there could be that temptation to maybe have another go and get back together. So what happens if they initially separate, they're living under the same roof, they do perhaps try again and they get back together? If they again separate after that, how does that impact the divorce?
Well, we go back to the first principles of being separated. So you have to be separated for 12 months to file for a divorce application. That's the first thing. But if you get back together for a period after separation, that is excluded from the 12 months. But then you have this rule that says, look, if you actually get back together cumulatively for more than 3 months, or for so say a month, and then 2 months over that sort of with that 12-month period, then or you get back together just for a straight 4-month period, then any time before that is killed off, I can say it that way, and you have to start again. So you might be separated for 10 months, you might get back together for 4, and then you've actually still got to then be re-separated for 12 months before you can apply for the divorce.
Speaking of killing off, what do you see as the greatest killer of a divorce application so that it doesn't proceed?
There's one, absolutely, and that's the date of separation. So this is an interesting thing because what is a separation? There's no formal declaration that you give anybody. It's a question of fact as to did one party tell the other party that they're separating. But sometimes it's not even as simple as that. One party may move out or be away with work for 3 months and informed a view in their own mind that they've separated. So you get this funny scenario where someone says, "Look, I separated in December 2021," and the other party says, "Well, no, you were just away for work as a FIFO for 4 months, and the 12 months doesn't start until you got back and you finally got round to telling me." So we have a dispute about the separation date. So when we get back to your question, what kills a divorce application? It's the argument, at least, that you haven't been separated for 12 months. And it's sometimes better rather than argue about that, is actually withdraw your divorce application and simply refile it.
Yeah, I mean, once you've agreed on when you've actually separated.
Yes,
yeah.
We tend to work off the last date as a guide.
Does anything else pop up more frequently?
Well, we have a bit of a dispute that arises usually about children's care arrangements. So if you have some familiarity with the divorce process, the court does want to make sure that any children who are under the roof and under the age of 18, their care, welfare and development is being managed by somebody before they make a divorce decree. So there can be disputes about, one party says about how much time they're spending between them, or in fact whether they're going to school. Those sort of things come up and are quite commonly disputed. Maybe, and sometimes the court has to decide, well, is that a sufficient dispute to actually stop the divorce going through, or do we need to amend the application slightly to take into account what the respondent might have said, that there's been a change in circumstances. So yeah, it's the most controversial other topic in a divorce application.
Yep. So you mentioned before about having to prove that the marriage actually occurred. Are there any other complexities about the marriage certificate itself which can get in the way of a divorce application proceeding?
Well, I think there's two that come to mind. Firstly, do I have a marriage certificate? Some countries don't issue them, so you have to go through a proof process that you actually got married. So most commonly in third world countries where marriages occur, Central Africa, for example, it's a ceremony where there's no formal paperwork. So you have to then produce affidavit evidence as best you can to prove that there was something that occurred. The other one is where we've got marriage certificates in foreign languages, and that's pretty common, although you'll see quite a number of jurisdictions that actually produce their marriage certificate in both English and the natural language. India is a pretty good example. So that's okay, provided the English translation is part of the marriage certificate. But if you do have one that's in Arabic, for example, you then produce what they call an affidavit of translation. And in Australia, there's actually some specialist organisations who will do that for you. So they basically will translate completely word for word your marriage certificate into English, and then they'll swear an affidavit to say, look, here is the original version, here is the translated version, I am an accredited translator, and that's what the court will require to get moving.
Sounds full on. So you can't just use Google Translate or anything like that to translate it yourself?
I would like to be able to say that I could write my own version and hand it in. That would save a lot of trouble and a few dollars.
But what happens if a foreign marriage certificate is lost?
Well, you've got to go back, if you can, to whoever issues marriage certificates in that country. That's your first attempt. So I know that we've been back to registries in Fiji, in Canada, India, trying to get a further copy of the marriage certificate. Again, I get back to the case that if you, despite all reasonable attempts, you can't get another copy, you get back to having to then prove you were married by other ways, by the swearing of affidavits, photographs of the ceremony, witnesses who might have actually been at the ceremony. Those sort of things will ultimately convince a court that a ceremony did happen.
Yeah. So what would you say to people, even with the above complexities that arise, that are they able to obtain a divorce even when there are some barriers in the way? Because you've listed off a whole heap of barriers already today, but it seems like you've always been able to get a positive solution at the end of it. Is that right?
That's very true. And look, when we file over 1,000 divorce applications a year, we run into a few questions and queries along the way. But I think the only real reasons that a divorce doesn't go through are the fact we've got a dispute about separation date, and then we usually ultimately go back and refile it. And in fact, people worry about losing their close to $1,000 court filing fee they might have, but the court will actually allow you to refile and use the same fee if you ask them nicely and explain that's what you want to do. And the other one we do lose on is people actually sometimes will reconcile or decide that it's not culturally appropriate to go through with the divorce, and we do discontinue a few applications a year for that reason.
Very good, very informative as always. On to our health topic of the week. could you make a suggestion about what tools or gadgets that people could use to help them get through a breakup? I'm interested to hear this one.
Oh, thanks. I've touched on a couple of things. One is about, getting out of your head and getting other information into it. And there's two devices that I recommend. One is a Kindle. A Kindle is essentially just, obviously, most people will be familiar with, is a reading tool that you can download books and other articles and things that help you get out of your head for a while. You might learn something as well, depending whether it's fictional or non-fiction. So the other one that I love is a set of good headphones for walking or running, and they're aftershocks. So hopefully we'll be able to put a little shot up of them or a link to them in the show notes. But for a relatively small amount of money, they sit over your ears, so they actually play through the bones in your ear rather than sort of sit in your ear. So they're a lovely, safe way to go out into the world and still be able to hear the traffic or listen to the waves as if you're walking along the ocean. Much safer potentially for, if you're walking along in a dark night, you'd probably want to be able to hear what's going on around you as well.
I would say so, yep.
But for bang for buck, I reckon they're one of the best tools to, again, listen to some music, get some more information in, and generally unwind.
All right, very good. Well, thank you. Thanks for the chat around divorce and how it can be easy and how it can be not at times. Appreciate you joining us again today on our 6th episode of Divorce Unplugged, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again next time.
Thanks very much, Dane, and I hope we can also add a few more layers in the next few episodes as well. That'll be fantastic.
Sounds good. We'll chat then.
Thank you.